Balake. Where is Balake at?
My name's Blake.
Do you want to go to war, Balake? I'm for real. Ron.
Ron is here. Welcome back, everyone, for more SPTV, where every day is a great day not to be in a cult. Guys, I'm so excited. I'm so excited to talk to you about Scientology being forced to pay taxes for the first time in 14 years. Now, it would be even better if we were talking about federal income tax and their Scientology and their tax exemption being revoked by the IRS, but that's not exactly what we're talking about today. We are talking about local property taxes in New Haven, Connecticut. And this is awesome because I think Scientology could see the same thing happening to them in other cities where they have squeezed all of their members for not all the money that they not all the money that they had and have, but even more so. Scientologists for the last 20 years have been going deeply, deeply into debt to fund David Miscavige's real estate scam that in Scientology they call the Ideal Org program. And this strategy has backfired in many, many ways. In some ways, it's allowed Scientology to raise an obscene amount of money. And in other ways, it has actually accelerated the demise of Scientology in terms of membership. And it's also backfired. Like, this money was raised to David Miscavige basically said, hey guys, I have figured out the reason Scientology is not expanding. Now, at the time, he couldn't actually admit that Scientology wasn't expanding. So it was more like, I have discovered the reason why Scientology is not expanding quite as fast as we would like it to in order to take over the world. And the reason is, drum roll please, our buildings aren't quite pretty enough. Now, it happens to be the exact opposite of what L. Ron Hubbard said. And whereas I don't care about what L. Ron Hubbard says, I'm sure you don't care about what L. Ron Hubbard says. Scientologists are at least supposed to. But David Miscavige had solved the problem. He said our buildings aren't pretty enough. And also realize Miscavige would never admit to the Scientologists how much money Scientology actually has in the bank. I remember when I first found out back in 2009 that Scientology had over $1 billion in the bank. I was still a Scientologist in good standing at that point. I was livid. I was livid to learn that Scientology had that much money in the bank. Because whereas it's not crazy for institutions, let's just take Ivy League universities, for example. They have tens and tens and tens and tens, many tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in the bank. Whereas that's not unusual. People who donate to Ivy League universities already know that those universities have that much money in the bank, and they donate anyway. The opposite is true in Scientology. Scientologists had no clue that Scientology had this much money in the bank. Otherwise, why would Scientologists constantly be being hit up for money that they don't have, that Scientology claims to need? And that was really what it came down to. When Scientology squeezes its members for money, they give those members the impression that money is urgently needed in order to do X, Y, and Z. And it turns out it's just not true. So Miscavige couldn't admit that he had all this money in the bank. And he said, this is our new strategy. We have to buy all these new buildings, these brand new buildings. They've got to be 50,000 square feet or more. There was a bunch of criteria in addition to that. And we need to buy these buildings with new money. So you had Scientologists giving everything they could and much, much more, going deeply into debt, many of them going into bankruptcy, to give Scientology the money they needed to buy these new buildings. And in many cases, Scientology was able to squeeze enough money to buy the building, but they weren't able to squeeze enough money in order to raise enough new money to renovate the building. And also realize that actually completing this strategy would not be good for David Miscavige, because if he completed this strategy and he actually bought and renovated brand new 50,000 plus square foot buildings for every organization in the world, he would now have to come up with some new reason why Scientology is failing. Whereas of right now, he can point to organizations that have not successfully completed the Ideal Org strategy as the reason Scientology is not expanding, for the reason Scientology orgs are not expanding, for the reason why Scientology orgs have not achieved what they call in Scientology the size of Old St. Hill. Because what happens when all orgs in the world achieve the size of Old St. Hill? David Miscavige has to release OT 9 and 10. And that's a problem because OT 9 and 10 doesn't exist. They do not exist. So the Ideal Org strategy was accomplished a couple things. It gave David Miscavige a way to raise an obscene amount of money without having to give Scientologists anything in return. And it also gave him a way to blame Scientologists for the fact that OT 9 and 10 have not been released. And it also gave him a way to postpone ever having to handle the problem of, what happens if I ever have to release OT 9 and 10? Okay, so let's get down to the very specific media item here. This is another way this strategy has backfired. Is now, not only do they not have enough, have they not been able to raise enough money to renovate these buildings that have been purchased, so these buildings have been sitting vacant, but now they're having to pay taxes on these properties because they have been vacant for so long that Scientology can no longer claim that these buildings serve any type of a religious purpose. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania is having the exact same problem. They purchased a big giant skyscraper. I think it's on Walnut Street or Chestnut Street. I always get it wrong. In downtown Philly, the building's been sitting there absolutely vacant, untouched, unrenovated, unoccupied, unused for, I don't know, 15 to 20 years now. What was it? About 2008, they purchased the building. Do the math on it, you guys. I can't do the math as I sit here right now. Okay, so let's see what's happening in New Haven, Connecticut. Scientologists pay taxes. Ready partial demolition. Okay. The Church of Scientology has paid local taxes for the first time in 14 years for a vacant former furniture store in Westville Village, and is now looking to demolish part of that neglected property as part of a long delayed renovation. According to the city's tax bill website, the state branch of the Church of Scientology paid the city $39,000 and change on July 24th for real estate taxes that it owed on 949 Wally Avenue. Every time I do a video, guys, you correct me on how to pronounce this, and I always forget it, so I'm just going with Wally. That represents the first half of Scientology's local tax bill for the two-story former Halleck's building. The next half, also worth about $40,000, is due January 1st. This is devastating to the local Scientologists. I'm willing to bet that that organization doesn't make $80,000 a year. Scientology has this reputation for having a ton of money. And they do have a lot of money in the bank, and they do raise a lot of money through things like this real estate scam. But Scientology organizations actually do not make enough money, do not have enough operational cash flow. They do not have enough profit in many cases to even pay their utility bills. And that's incredible, considering the fact that they don't have to pay their staff. They do not have a staff overhead. Staff members are paid a percentage of the weekly adjusted gross income. If the gross income is zero, the staff are paid zero. They're considered religious volunteers. They don't even have to be paid minimum wage. And yet, the biggest, most successful Scientology organizations in the United States, in many cases, are not making enough money to even pay their electric bills. This is one of the other reasons that Miscavige had to come up with a real estate scam in order to find another way to squeeze money out of Scientologists. When Scientology was making most of its money from selling Scientology courses and auditing, there was a cap on how much money Scientology could squeeze out of any individual member, because eventually the person has paid for all of the auditing someone can pay for. Eventually, the person has paid for all of the courses there are to do. Sometimes you'd have a guy who would then, once he paid for all of his own Scientology, he'd start paying for other people's Scientology. But still, there was a cap on how much money you could squeeze out of someone. There's a membership organization in Scientology called the International Association of Scientologists. And this was a way for Miscavige to be able to get money out of Scientologists just for the heck of getting money. He'd give them awards, trophies, pins. They didn't have to give them any auditing or courses. But even as of about 20 years ago, the most amount of money you could give to the IAS was $250,000. Your status that you got was called Patron Meritorious. It was the highest IAS status that existed. $250,000. That was it. Now, $250,000 to most people is an awful lot of money. But to David Miscavige, the little tiny cult leader, that wasn't good enough. Guys, we're 20 years hence, and the most money someone is now given to the IAS is over $350 million. That's Bob Duggan and Trish Duggan. Actually, I remember the event when David Miscavige released the first new donation statuses for the IAS. And it was the event where Tom Cruise got his big, giant dinner plate IAS medal called the IAS Freedom Medal of Valor. And in the same event where Tom Cruise got his medal, David Miscavige announced 3 new donor statuses to the IAS. Silver meritorious, that was 500,000. Gold meritorious, that was $1 million. And platinum meritorious, $2.5 million. And not only did Tom Cruise get awarded his IAS Freedom Medal of Valor at that event, Tom Cruise was given his platinum meritorious IAS award and his pin. And Tom Cruise, at that, when he was awarded that, was the first and only person awarded that status. So the implication was no one had ever given Scientology more money than Tom Cruise, and that Tom Cruise had given Scientology $2.5 million. That was a big deal in 2004. It's 20 years later. We've gone from $2.5 million being the most someone had donated, and it being Tom Cruise, to over $350 million. So you can see, as a tiny little cult leader, that Tom Cruise's best friend, little Captain David Miscavige of the fake Space Navy, is. Imagine he's sitting over there thinking how brilliant he is. He's like, I'm brilliant. We used to make money selling Scientology. That was silly. We don't do that anymore. Now we make money through the IAS and through the Ideal Org real estate scam. It's actually quite brilliant in terms of cult leadership goes, if your goal is to raise as much money as possible. But what it's actually done is put such a financial burden onto Scientologists that it has accelerated the decline of Scientology's membership. Staff members have already been very, very poorly paid people. I mean, when I was on staff, we'd be happy if we got $50, $100. And that's considering that staff members have to actually pay for their own expenses in the real world. Scientology's Sea Organization members are lucky to get $50 a week, but they also don't have to pay for anything. They don't have to support themselves. Scientology staff members do. And even as a staff member, I'd be thrilled to get $100, $150 a week. That was amazing. Well, when you take a small org that has almost no staff and makes almost no money, and their pay is based on the adjusted gross income, the overhead of that building is important. If you then make that small org with small staff and only a few public, and you put them in a 50,000 square foot building, all of a sudden the staff pay sum goes to zero every week because they honestly can't even pay the electric bill. So that's what I mean when I say this real estate scam has been successful for the cult leader in terms of dollars in the bank, but it's been unsuccessful in terms of retaining members and retaining staff members. Because if people could barely afford to be on staff before this real estate scam started, now they really can barely afford to be on staff. And so you wind up with less staff in bigger buildings. It looks more ridiculous. It's more obvious your orgs are empty and failing. And it is this fact that makes me go, does David Miscavige even actually care if Scientology expands or grows? Because it really doesn't seem like it. It seems like he's much more concerned with appearances than reality. And he doesn't really seem concerned with the fact that the more effort he puts into appearances, the worse the reality gets. It's a weird dwindling spiral that this little cult leader of this little cult has gotten himself into. Okay, so let's see what else is interesting in this article. Okay, yeah, so this only represents the first half of Scientology's tax bill. The next half is due January 1st. That's right, $80,000 of hard donated funds from the few Scientologists that are in Connecticut. $80,000 just went right to a tax bill. Unbelievable. Okay, so let's see. In February, the tax assessor's office returned the property to the tax rolls on the grounds that the property is not being used for a tax-exempt purpose and there's no construction under progress. Thus, the sent and paid July tax bill. Wow. According to recent filings with the building and city planning departments, construction or at least demolition may soon be coming to the church-owned building. I got a prediction, y'all. It's not. It is not. Guys, there's probably like 6 Scientologists in Connecticut. The Scientologist I remember most clearly from Connecticut was a woman named Carolyn Rinaldi. And I remember she was, I remember Carolyn. I think Carolyn is still in Scientology. Yeah. I don't even remember any other Scientologists from Connecticut. There's a reason that this building has sat vacant, untouched on anything for as long as it has. They cannot afford to do the work on this building. Of course, they have to say that they're going to, but I don't think it's going to happen. A 6-page document states that the building was originally constructed as a Masonic temple in 1930. Okay, interesting. What else is interesting? I don't want to read this whole thing here. Portions of the building are proposed to be removed or demolished, including windows, front steps, landing, non-historic building addition on the western side of the property. Oh, interesting. They're actually demolishing the non-historic part. Okay. The building is slated for renovation to be occupied by the Church of Scientology of Connecticut. To ensure safe occupancy, specific remediations are required. Additionally, to complete the renovations, it is necessary to restore deteriorating building elements to maintain the historical aesthetics that contribute to the National Register Historic District. Blah, 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 blah. Nobody really cares. Okay. I can tell you this. When I was still in the Sea Org, I left the Sea Org in 2006. So when I was still in, I was still in the Sea Org when Miscavige announced this real estate scam. And if he had announced back then that in 20 years from then, this strategy not only would not be completed, but would only be about halfway done, there honestly would have been a revolt among Scientologists. I mean, generally speaking, I would say that a revolt in Scientology is impossible. Because of the various beliefs that they have about the upper OT levels, about the upper unreleased OT levels, about Miscavige being personally selected by L. Ron Hubbard to take over the show, which is not true. But due to various beliefs and due to the absolute control that Miscavige has over the finances and operations of Scientology, something like a revolt just wouldn't be possible. But I say this with a high level of confidence. If Miscavige ever got up in front of all the Scientologists at Ruth Eckerd Hall or the Shrine Auditorium or the Fort Harrison Hotel Auditorium in Clearwater, Florida, and he said, Scientologists of the world, I have a plan. And this plan is going to guarantee the release of OT 9 and 10. And what we're going to do is X, Y, and Z. And the target date for completion is in 20 years. Honestly, I think the audience would rush the stage, take out the little fella, and impose someone else as the leader. Somehow, David Miscavige manages to convince all the Scientologists that these grand plans that everyone can see are not working and are not moving forward are always just about a year or two away from being completed. Oh, and that was actually the point of this story. When I was in Scientology in the Sea Org and this whole real estate scam was announced, we were told that Scientology had contracted with the world's most prestigious design and architectural and construction firm, and that every org in the world was going to be finished in the next 12 months. I am not kidding. That is what we were told 20 years ago. Now, I am routinely reminded that when it comes to cults, there really is no limit to how much BS you can convince members of. And, I'm reminded of other even crazier examples of some of these religious cults that predict the end of the world. And they just keep predicting the end of the world on a specific date. And that date just keeps coming and going. And somehow the world doesn't end. And somehow the members of these cults do not leave, because there's always a way to spin it. There's always a way to explain it. I remember, some of the old timer Scientologists will tell you that, like back in the 70s or the 80s, L. Ron Hubbard was always predicting nuclear Armageddon. And then it would always be said that the only reason it hasn't happened yet is because of the positive effect Scientology has been having on the world. But the clock really is ticking. And if we don't expand fast enough, everyone's reactive minds in the world, all the politicians, all the political leaders' reactive minds will overwhelm them to such an extent that they will hit that red button. They will launch those nukes and civilization will be over. And so that is why the job of the Scientologists is so important. Scientologists think they're so much smarter than everyone else, but they are no smarter than the members of the cults where the leader is predicting the end of the world. Armageddon is coming on Tuesday, and then Tuesday comes and goes and is like, oops, I got a new message. Scientologists are just as dumb, but let's be honest, dumb is not the right word. You do not have to actually be intellectually dumb to fall for this stuff. And that's actually what's so scary. Okay, so that's it, guys. Just wanted to share the great news. Scientology had to pay taxes for the first time in 14 years. Unfortunately, it was only in New Haven, Connecticut. But I do think you're going to see things like this rolling out in many of the other cities around the U.S. and around the world. The U.S. is a little more relevant because the U.S. is where Scientology has tax exemption. And in almost every other country in Europe, for example, they don't. Yeah. I think this strategy, this real estate strategy is coming back to bite David Miscavige in the ass in some major, major ways. And the fact that now they're going to be on the hook for property taxes for all these buildings, man, oh man. All right, guys, I got the lovely Barbara in the back office helping me star some comments. Let's take a look at a few of these. Capricious Caroline, I am in Connecticut and I couldn't be happier. That is awesome. Good to see you, Caroline. Scientology up north. Hey, Aaron and crew. Good to see you, Scientology up north. Thanks for joining me in here. Dino Nugget says, that building is filled with mold. I can't even imagine the condition that building is in. Dino Nugget says, I actually have OT9 and 10. I use them as coasters. Well, they got to go to some use. Thank you, Dino Nuggets. Mary James checking in from the city of brotherly love, Philly. Good to see everyone. Good to see everyone. Good to see you, Mary James. Let's see here. From a poet, Brian Lucas. Good to see you, Brian. Texas Audit 101. Hello, everyone. Marilyn Honig says that's a lot of real estate for 6 people. Plus, they have another smaller building. Yeah, that's right. They're in this tiny, tiny little building right now that I can't remember if they rent it or not. But literally, it looks like a house. It looks like a small to medium-sized house. And what you have to understand about that building is the number of Scientologists in New Haven, Connecticut have never necessitated a building larger than what you see there. Because I promise you, if there was an organic demand for a larger space, the organization would be making enough money to simply afford to move into a larger space. The fact that they never have is all the evidence that you need that the organization isn't busy enough or profitable enough in order to accomplish that. And the same is true for the organization in downtown Philly at 1315 Race Street. That building is busier and makes less money today than it did 20 years ago. Let's see. Matt Elliott to MAA, SPTV Canada. They need to pay all taxes backdated to 1993. I wish. All right, guys, that's all for right now. Much more to come later. Thank you for hanging out with me, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe right here.